The cafe smelled of butter and chicory coffee, the kind of place tourists photographed before tasting a bite. I had dressed simply in a linen dress, not wanting attention, only a seat at the table, Brielle, in her pastel jacket and jeweled earrings, leaned across her mimosa and smirked. "You're lucky we even include you even though you're useless." Her words cut sharper than the silverware set between us. I glanced at my son. Asher adjusted his cufflinks, eyes on his phone, pretending not to hear. My aunt stirred her iced tea, lips pressed thin, and gave a tiny nod as if to agree. Around us, waiters carried plates of eggs. Benedict folded like origami, napkins shaped into swans. But all I could taste was bitterness. I forced a smile, the kind that aches behind the eyes, and took a sip of coffee. I had learned long ago that silence kept the peace in our family. Anyone who objected was too sensitive. Anyone who asked for respect was the problem. I let their laughter roll past me like I wasn't even there. Though every word anchored deep, Asher finally looked up and offered a practiced chuckle. The same one he used in sales meetings. Not for me, never for me, only to smooth the air around his wife. My stomach tightened, but my hands stayed steady. I had carried this family through flights, loans, and endless excuses. Yet, in that moment, I saw the truth more clearly than I ever had. I wasn't a guest here. I was the backdrop. I set my cup down and folded my napkins slowly, already knowing I would never sit at this table again without changing everything about how I played my role. After that brunch, I couldn't stop replaying the path that had carried me here. It always circled back to Houston, where I built a life out of necessity, not luxury. When Asher was still in grade school, I worked long hours as a purchasing coordinator at a hospital. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I became fluent in numbers, contracts, and vendor negotiations, skills that made me invaluable at work but invisible at home. Raising him alone after the divorce meant I had no room for mistakes. Every bill had to be paid on time. Every decision calculated. I skipped vacations, worked weekends, and built a credit history clean enough to unlock doors for everyone else. My siblings leaned on me for airline tickets when they claimed their cards wouldn't swipe. My aunt would call from Baton Rouge, insisting she couldn't figure out hotel bookings, and I handled them because it was easier. Then came Asher's requests. At first, small things: a down payment for his first apartment, a credit card he promised to pay off after his bonus cleared. The bonus never came. Later, bigger things followed, covering deposits, smoothing over overdrafts, buying time when he said he just needed a little help until his next deal closed. I didn't argue. I wanted him to believe he could lean on me the way I once leaned on no one. Over time, they stopped asking with hesitation. The assumption was built in: if Rowena has the means, Rowena will do it. And I did, again and again, telling myself responsibility was the way to prove my worth. Somewhere along the years, responsibility stopped being a choice and became a chain. And the heaviest link of all was the lakehouse. A property they all called ours, but one I knew had only ever been mine to carry. The lakehouse at Caddo Lake was always spoken of as the family's pride, the place we gathered for summer barbecues, fishing weekends, and hurried holiday escapes. They called it our cabin, but the county records told a different story. The deed carried only my name, and I was the one who had kept it that way. Back in 2009, when my father's loan had slipped into default and foreclosure notices arrived like clockwork, the rest of the family whispered about losing it. No one had the credit or the stability to save it. And when the bank required a cosigner, every eye turned to me. I signed the papers, took on the debt, and carried the burden without ceremony. Everyone said, "Good, we got to keep it," and then never mentioned it again. From then on, Every bill tied to that cabin flowed through my accounts, the insurance, the property taxes, the utilities that ran year-round even when no one was there. I drove 3 hours from Houston to clear fallen branches, to meet repair crews when the roof leaked, to shovel mud from the porch after spring floods. Each time, I left the place tidy so that the next weekend, they could arrive with friends and coolers, post photos, and leave beer cans scattered across the grass. They never asked how the power stayed on or who restocked the propane. They just assumed someone else would handle it. Brielle even went so far as to lend the cabin out to her friends, telling them it was part of the family legacy. When I learned strangers had stayed there without my knowledge, I swallowed my anger and let it pass. For years, I told myself that maintaining the cabin was proof I belonged, but the truth was sinking in. It had become nothing more than another account I paid, another obligation I carried while they reaped the rewards. And it was that thought I carried back with me the night of the brunch, when I opened my laptop and stared at the family credit account, still tethered to my name. The drive back from New Orleans was long enough to let the insult settle into something harder than hurt. By the time I crossed the Texas line, I wasn't replaying Brielle's smirk anymore. I was making lists in my head. What was in my name? What was tied to my accounts? What chains I had forged with my own sense of duty? That evening, Houston felt unusually quiet. I set down my purse, brewed peppermint tea, and opened my laptop. The familiar family credit account blinked on the screen. Every authorized user neatly listed Asher, Brielle, my aunt, even my brother. Line after line of transactions scrolled by groceries, hotel rooms, shopping sprees, all under my name. For years, I had tracked every charge, made neat spreadsheets, sent gentle reminders. Tonight, I didn't bother. With a few keystrokes, I began removing names. The system paused each time, asking, "Are you sure you want to revoke access for the first time?" I clicked yes without hesitation. One by one, the chains snapped. By the end, only my name remained. Next, I drafted a short email to Jared, the attorney I had once consulted in Marshall when foreclosure threatened the cabin. Subject line: ready now. I didn't elaborate. He would know. The sale of the house was no longer an idea to toy with. It was my exit strategy. Finally, I opened a blank document and typed out Asher's name. I wrote the amount he owed from a loan he had promised to repay after a bonus that never came. I kept the words spare and formal, outlining repayment within 30 days. My hand hovered over my phone, tempted to call him and soften it, to explain myself. Instead, I shut the phone off. I closed the laptop just past midnight. Tea gone cold. A strange calm filling the space where dread used to sit. The next morning, the silence would begin to shift, and I would finally hear what it sounded like when they no longer had me to lean on. The first sign came 2 mornings later. My phone lit up before dawn with a string of messages from Brielle. She wrote in clipped sentences, each one more frantic than the last. Their card had been declined at a restaurant in Uptown, and she was humiliated in front of friends. I let the screen dim without responding, poured hot water over my tea bag, and watched the steam curl above the cup. By noon, the lakehouse utilities had joined the chorus. Past due notices pinged my email, the electric company warning of service suspension, the water department attaching a reminder of unpaid fees. For more than a decade, I had paid them automatically, the bills disappearing from my account like clockwork. Now, with those drafts canceled, the silence on my end turned into noise on theirs. That evening, Asher called 3 times in a row. His voice spilled out on voicemail, strained but still trying for charm. "Mom, there must be some mix-up with the account. Can you take a look? We'll fix it. I promise." The fourth call was sharper. You can't just shut things down without telling me. I set the phone face down and sipped my tea until the ringing stopped. By the weekend, the group text was alive with agitation. My aunt posted a photo of the cabin porch. Grass up to her knees and the porch light dark. What's going on? Did someone forget the bill? My brother added a sarcastic note about how unreliable things had gotten lately. Not one of them mentioned the years I had kept the place running alone. Not one of them asked if I was all right. I muted the conversation and stepped out onto my balcony. The evening air was still. A faint hum of traffic below, but inside my chest, there was a strange lightness I hadn't felt in years. Every unanswered call, every ignored message was proof that I had finally stopped cushioning them. The cracks were showing, and for once, I wasn't rushing in to seal them. Instead, I leaned against the railing and let the silence settle, knowing it was only the beginning of what would come. I left Houston before sunrise. The road still quiet. The sky just beginning to lighten. The drive to Caddo Lake had always been familiar. 3 hours of pine trees, winding highways, and the hum of my own thoughts. I used to take comfort in the routine, knowing I was heading toward a place that carried so many family memories. But this time, the closer I got, the heavier the silence felt. When I pulled into the gravel drive, the cabin looked just as it always had, the wooden porch sagging in places, the shutters needing fresh paint, the swing chain rusted from years of weather. Yet I knew it differently now. This wasn't a family retreat. It was my responsibility alone. A responsibility that had been taken for granted until I finally stopped carrying it. Inside, dust lingered on the shelves, and the faint smell of cedar clung to the walls. I walked through each room slowly, running my hand across the furniture I had repaired, the floorboards I had refinished, the curtains I had replaced after storms. On the wall hung photographs. Asher as a boy holding his first fish. My parents smiling on the porch. A summer group shot with cousins sprawled across the lawn. I took each frame down carefully, wrapping them in newspaper and setting them in a box I had brought. It wasn't anger that guided me. It was clarity. These weren't memories I needed to leave hanging for others to claim. After sealing the box, I sat at the old desk in the corner and opened my laptop. I typed a short message to Jared. My attorney and Marshall proceed with the private listing. No public notice until title work is clear. My finger hovered only a moment before pressing send. As I was loading the box into my car, a voice called from the fence line. It was Inez Boudreau, the neighbor who had lived there longer than anyone. She leaned on the post, watching me with knowing eyes. I always wondered how you kept this place going, she said softly. Never once saw anyone else doing the work. Her words caught me off guard. Simple but steady. For years, I had convinced myself no one noticed. Yet here was proof someone had. I nodded, grateful, then closed the trunk with a final push. 2 days after I returned from the cabin, an email from Inez appeared in my inbox. She had attached a single screenshot. No explanation. Just the line, "Thought you should see this." I hesitated before opening it, half expecting nothing more than another utility notice forwarded by mistake. Instead, the image showed a fragment of a mortgage application from months earlier. At the top was Asher's name. He had inquired about refinancing the cabin, hoping to add himself to the deed once ownership transferred. The loan officer's reply was blunt. That isn't possible. Title is solely under Rowena Hartley. It cannot be altered without her consent. My chest tightened as I read those lines again and again. He knew. He had known all along that the cabin was mine, that every tax receipt and insurance renewal bore only my name, and yet he let Brielle sneer at Brunch. Let her posture as though she and Asher were the rightful stewards of some family legacy while I was the burden. The betrayal wasn't in his silence. It was in the deliberate choice to let me take the blame. Brielle believed I was clinging to a house that belonged to everyone. He could have corrected her with a sentence. Instead, he stood back, letting her wield the insult while he preserved his easy smile. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the glow of my laptop. For years, I told myself Asher was caught between loyalties, that he simply avoided conflict. Now I saw the truth. Avoidance can be its own form of betrayal, especially when it keeps the lie intact. I closed the email and exhaled slowly. The decision to sell the cabin no longer felt like a private rebellion. It was a reckoning, and I knew the confrontation could not be avoided forever, because sooner or later, Asher would show up at my door. It was nearly dusk when the knock came. Firm at first, then insistent. I dried my hands on a dish towel and peered through the peephole. Asher stood on the porch, Brielle at his side, both of them framed by the fading light. I opened the door just enough to let the breeze slip in, but not enough to invite them over the threshold. "Mom, we need to talk," Asher began, his voice tight. Brielle jumped in before he could continue, her tone sharp with indignation. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it's been? Declined cards, utilities shut off at the lake. You've embarrassed all of us." I let her words hang. Asher softened his approach, reaching for guilt. "The cabin's part of our family history. Think of the grandkids. They'll never know those summers if you sell it." I stepped back just long enough to pick up the folder I had prepared days earlier. Inside were the Harrison County deed records, the insurance policies, and the very mortgage inquiry screenshot Inez had sent me. I handed it to Asher without a word. His eyes skimmed the page, and I watched the color drain from his face. "You knew," I said quietly. "You knew it was mine, and you let her treat me like the problem." Brielle shifted uncomfortably, her confidence cracking. "This is being blown out of proportion. We could have worked something out." I shook my head. "Sons don't treat their mothers like ATMs, and wives don't get to rewrite deeds with sneers and entitlement. This cycle ends tonight." Asher looked at me, blinking hard as if searching for the woman he once depended on, the mother who always said yes. But I wasn't her anymore. I steadied my hand on the door, pushed gently, and let it close between us. No shouting, no dramatics, only the final sound of the latch catching, their voices muffled on the other side, fading as footsteps retreated down the porch steps. I leaned against the wood, not shaken, not triumphant, but certain. The line had been drawn, and there would be no stepping back over it. The house sale would move forward, and with it, my life. The closing took place in a modest office in Marshall, a far cry from the noise that had surrounded the cabin for years. I signed my name across the final documents, each stroke steady, each page another layer of weight lifted. When the attorney handed me the confirmation, I felt something settle in my chest, a quiet finality that words couldn't touch. The funds transferred into my account later that afternoon. I had already decided how to handle them. A portion went directly into a trust established for my grandchild, structured so tightly that neither Asher nor Brielle could ever touch it. It wasn't generosity toward them. It was a safeguard for the one person still innocent in all of this. The rest I kept simple. I closed every lingering account tied to family use, severed the automatic drafts for utilities, and deleted the shared credit portal from my bookmarks. Years of spreadsheets, reminders, and excuses vanished with a few clicks. For the first time in decades, my ledger carried only my own name. I drove out of Marshall with the windows down, the air sharp with the scent of pine. Behind me, the cabin was no longer a burden waiting for the next bill. Ahead, There was only open road and the first hints of a life I could build on my own terms. I followed the highway west, toward the hills where a different kind of morning was waiting for me. I moved into a small limestone cottage in Wimberley, tucked between the oaks where the river bends slow and clear. The first morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, quiet and unhurried. I brewed coffee without checking my phone, without the dread of messages stacked high with demands. The silence was not emptiness. It was freedom. Each day began with a walk along the Blanco River. The water carried the color of sky and stone, and I let the sound of it wash through me, steady and constant. I no longer lived on call for anyone. My schedule was my own reading in the afternoons, cooking dinners I wanted, planting herbs in small pots by the window. At night, I sat at my desk and opened a clean notebook. On the first page, I wrote a single line in my own hand. I was never useless. I was used. I underlined it once, then closed the book. That truth was enough. Weeks passed, and the distance grew. The group chats stayed silent. The phone never rang with family pleas. I didn't chase the quiet. I let it stay. In that stillness, I heard something I hadn't in years, my own voice. Clear and steady, no longer drowned out by theirs. The hills breathed with me, the river kept moving, and I finally felt I was standing on ground that belonged only to me.